This story begins in the year 1942, when Japan attacked America at Pearl Harbor. After this attack, America also joined World War II and wanted to take revenge on Japan at any cost. Therefore, many bombers from the Navy took off to destroy all the Japanese submarines in the South Pacific. Among them was one aircraft with 3 people on board: pilot Harold Bardia, the bomb thrower Tony, and radio man John. As they were returning, they found themselves high above the clouds and lost their way, with their fuel tanks slowly running empty. Gene tried very hard to contact via radio to ask for directions, but due to a poor signal, he couldn't hear the voice clearly. Just then, he heard Japanese voices on the radio. He disconnected the radio and sent a message using Morse code. However, their fuel was running low, so their pilot Harold said that they needed to reconnect. He tried again, but they still couldn't establish contact. Now, Harold had no choice but to land on the vast ocean, and he told his companions to take out all the necessary equipment because they had to land right there, as the petrol was about to run out. They landed in the vast ocean, and after landing, Harold's belt came undone, but Tony and Gene's belts did not. Now, they began to sink with the aircraft, going deeper and deeper. But just before they sank with the aircraft, their belts came undone, and both of them surfaced where Harold was. They had an airport nearby, and the 3 of them sat on it, but they had neither food to eat nor water to drink. Although everything was in their aircraft, they were trapped inside and couldn't retrieve anything. In this vast ocean, where they saw no end, the 3 of them were stuck, but they were confident that soon the Navy would come to rescue them. And indeed, they saw a U.S. Navy aircraft in the sky. The chief said to drop the parachute in the water so that it could be seen from above, as their airboat was very small and could not be seen from that height. But they had no parachute. It had sunk with the aircraft, nor did they have a flare gun to signal their presence. The 3 of them took out their life jackets and started waving them while shouting, but the aircraft was too far away to see them, and it flew back. Harold, the pilot, said that they had come to find them, and that was their last chance. Tony said that they couldn't just leave them in this vast ocean. He said they wouldn't come back to search the same spot repeatedly, meaning they had to find a way to get out themselves. But Harold, who was the senior among them, knew that they were all stuck here. He told them to take off their shoes because the journey was going to be long, and the 3 of them took off their shoes. However, their airport was so small that there was no space to keep any belongings, so they had to throw their shoes away. After this, Tony and Gene threw their shoes into the ocean, but Harold did not throw his shoes. Seeing this, both were surprised. Gene said, "You didn't throw your shoes." He replied that if they found land, one of them would have to walk, so they needed to save 1 foot. Their first day in this ocean passed without water and food, and the biggest problem was that there was not enough space for all 3 to sleep together, so they took turns sleeping. At night, their chief, whose name was not mentioned, asked if anyone wanted to drink water. Tony and Gene looked at him in surprise, and then Harold urinated into his shoe and drank it because he knew that finding water here would not be easy. The next morning, Harold informed them that they were stuck in the ocean and heading towards Hawaii, which was about 1,900 miles away, while South America was 6,000 miles away. Harold, being the pilot, had a good sense of direction. He said that if they kept going this way, they would reach in a few weeks. Hearing this, both were astonished. Tony said that even if they reached, they would die of hunger and thirst before that. Gene said that there were many fish in the water, and they had to do something. Now, among the little supplies they had, there was a magazine with a spring in it, and they made a fishing hook from the spring and dropped it into the water. Just then, something got caught on their hook, and they tried to pull it up. When they pulled, the rope broke, and the hook was lost. Gene said that there were others in the water who were hungrier than them. Although they were in the ocean, the heat was intense. So, Gene jumped into the water, saying he couldn't bear the heat anymore. But Harold stopped him. He said he had heard that there were sharks in the water, and when this was told to Gene, He quickly returned to the boat. Time passed slowly, and they had been on this boat for 5 days. For 5 days, they had not had a sip of water or a bite of food, and all three became very weak. When Tony could no longer bear it, he tried to drink seawater, but Harold stopped him, saying that the water would only dehydrate him further. The main reason for their predicament was that Harold, their pilot, was heading west and asked Gene for confirmation about their direction, but the radio told Gene that they needed to go east. Because of this, they lost their way, and due to running out of petrol, they were now stuck in the ocean. Suddenly, Harold remembered that he had a pencil in his shirt pocket, which made him very happy. He took out the pencil and said that they could make a chart to determine their exact location. After that, he began to draw a chart on his raft, and after determining their position, he said that they needed to stop their boat from drifting with the wind. They made an anchor from their life jackets and other supplies they had, which would stabilize their boat in one place. When they pulled it up, they would go in the direction the wind was blowing, allowing them to head where they wanted to go. They dropped the anchor into the water, stabilizing their boat, and then they prayed. After praying, Gene said that they hadn't done everything right in life, but they needed help. Harold prayed to God to protect all the boats in this ocean, and that one of those boats should be theirs. Tony said that his friends were right, but what they needed most was rain. He asked for rain, but it did not rain. This disappointed Tony. Gene said to give God a little time. Night fell, and while everyone was sleeping, it started to rain. After many days, they had their first sip of water, which brought them great relief because their bodies were completely dehydrated. The next day, it showed Gene trying to catch fish, but he couldn't catch a single one. Tony said, "I've never seen anyone with less patience than you. You've been trying to catch fish for a week, but you haven't caught a single one." Gene replied that where he came from, there was a saying, "You don't catch, you don't eat." But Gene was frustrated and took out his knife. Harold told him how many times he had said to keep that knife with him because it was the only thing that could puncture their raft. But Gene didn't listen to him and started waiting for fish in the water. As soon as he saw a fish, he stabbed at it, but he accidentally stabbed the raft. He said, "I made a mistake. I stabbed the raft." Harold said, "Don't pull out the knife because if you do, the water will fill the raft and we'll lose it." But Gene saw that he had stabbed a baby shark and pulled it up onto the raft. After that, they all worked together to kill the baby shark, and from its belly, many small fish came out. This was their first solid meal after a whole week, which not only made them happy, but also gave their bodies energy. Harold said, "I'm going home now. My wife will be very angry with me." He asked the other two if they were married. In fact, they didn't know each other well enough personally. Gene said he was not married but had a girlfriend. Tony said, "When you get back, you should date my sister. She's very beautiful." While they were talking, they noticed many sharks circling around them. They had eaten the baby shark, and some of its blood had spilled into the water, attracting all the sharks. But they did not attack them that night. They all swam away. In fact, the South Pacific is famous for sharks, and they could have easily attacked them at night, but this time they were lucky and survived. They had eaten, and now they had water, but as the days went by, they began to weaken again. One night, while Gene was sitting with his hand in the water, something attacked his hand, injuring it. Fortunately, he didn't get severely hurt. Then Gene thought he saw something in front of him and thought it was an island. He pointed it out to Tony, but Tony said there was nothing there. It was just his imagination. They were also having strange dreams. On the morning of the 15th day, it showed Tony holding his gun, and then Gene quietly said to him not to make any noise. Tony nodded, and then he saw a bird sitting to their right. Harold was also sleeping there. Gene shot at the bird, and the bullet hit it, but it fell into the sea. When they saw that they had hit a bird, they went into the water to retrieve it. As soon as they picked up the bird, they saw a shark behind it. Harold quickly swam towards his raft, and before the shark could spot them, it passed under their raft. In this way, Harold was saved, and now they had food again. This was the second time in 15 days that they had food. But as the days went by, it was affecting their minds. They were having strange dreams, and now they had been there for 20 days. When Harold woke up in the morning, he saw that there was no wind. This made him angry. He said, "I gave you orders, but you didn't follow them." Jean said there was nothing to see, and they should have reached Ireland by now. Harold said he had a rough picture in his mind, and hearing this, both were astonished. He said, "A rough picture?" This meant that Harold still wasn't sure where they were. Jean said, "Because of you, we had to land in the ocean because you didn't know where our ship was. You took us far away from our ship, which is why we went out of range and couldn't communicate with them." Harold accepted that when he was up in the air, he had fallen asleep for a few seconds, and when he opened his eyes, they had drifted far away. They didn't know where they were, and due to running out of petrol, they had to land in the ocean, and now they were stuck. Harold felt very guilty about all this and apologized to the others, tears in his eyes. But now they couldn't do anything. Then Harold had an idea. He took his shoes and cut them with Jean's knife to make 2 paddles from the soles so they could go in whatever direction they wanted. Tony said that whoever saw Ireland first would treat the other 2 to dinner at their favorite place. But their destination was not that easy, and a few more days passed. Now they had been at sea for a full 30 days, and after 30 days, they no longer had the strength to speak because they were thirsty, hungry, and had no motivation. That night, it started to rain again, giving them water once more. But then, they saw a huge storm approaching, and they got caught in it. Their raft capsized, and Tony, who couldn't swim, was lost. But then they saw that Tony was on the other side of the raft. They managed to right the raft, and with great difficulty, all climbed back onto it one by one. In this way, they survived the terrible storm. The next morning, it showed that all 3 were extremely exhausted, and the little supplies they had were lost in the storm. They had now accepted that they were not going to be rescued. They lay on the raft like living corpses, reminiscing about home. Jean remembered his sister sitting in the ocean, and he reacted the way Tony had described her, imagining her image. He told Tony that he thought he had fallen in love with his sister. Tony said they would make a great couple. Hearing this, Harold felt very sad. He said he didn't know it would turn out this way and asked for forgiveness. Harold felt guilty for all of this, but then Tony sat up with great difficulty and said that they had come too far to give up now. After that, he started paddling with his hands, and seeing this, the other 2 sat up and did the same. Harold said, "I saw a very green field." Harold said, "I've had this dream twice." After that, Harold took a little seawater and started drinking it. He had accepted that he would not survive. Just then, Jean, who was lying down, said, "I see something green in front of me." When all 3 looked up, they saw it was an island. Seeing this, they all felt a surge of joy and energy because after spending 34 days at sea, they had finally reached a small island. They began to paddle towards it with all their might, and moments later, all 3 were lying on the shore. After 34 days, they touched land, which brought them immense relief. On this beach, there were 2 huts, and all 3 of them walked towards them. In this way, they completed their difficult journey and reached a beach named Pukapuka on February 20th, 1942. Their lives were saved because they never lost hope during such a difficult journey. Hope is something that teaches you to fight in life, to move forward. It brings passion within you, and with that passion, they survived. In the end, it is mentioned that the 3 of them traveled over 1,000 miles in that small raft, and Harold was awarded by the Navy for leading his crew so well during this difficult journey. However, after that, he never flew an aircraft again. When Tony fully recovered, he continued his career in the Navy, and when he died in 1986, his ashes were scattered over the ocean. Jim also worked as a radio man during the war and married Tony's sister Frances in 1946. Finally, a real picture of the 3 of them is shown, revealing how much they struggled during those 34 days at sea. So, this was a true incident from World War II. in which Harold Dixon, Tony Pestula, and Jean Elrich saved their lives. We hope you enjoyed this story.